And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Rob Shelsky, investigative writer with a degree in science, who has written a large number of factual articles for the former AlienSkin Magazine and many others. Today, he joins us to talk about the hollow moon theory from his book, For the Moon is Hollow and Aliens Rule the Sky. Rob, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Rob, what got you interested in all this UFO stuff in the first place?
Well, I started getting interested in UFOs when I was 7 years old, and that was back in the late 50s. And I remember having an argument with my father saying that they were real, and he would say, no, they're not. And that was at 7. And then my brother had some missing time. And so gradually, bit by bit, I became more and more involved, and I started researching all of this. And the more I researched it, the more involved I became. So it was kind of like falling down the rabbit hole.
And what led you to the moon and it being hollow?
Am I allowed to say another radio show?
Sure.
I was on George Norrie's Coast to Coast, and he asked me about it, and I laughed it off. I said, "Oh, come on, yeah, the moon's made of green cheese, whatever." And but then after the show was over, I slowly began thinking about it, checked into it, and realized there was some pretty good evidence for the idea that it might be hollow. I'm not saying it is hollow, but I'm saying there is reasonable evidence to suppose that it could be hollow. I kind of go for hard facts.
All right, let's break into that evidence. What facts do you have?
Well, the moon is weird. It's very, very weird. Its orbit is too circular. It's like the second most circular orbit in the solar system, Venus being the first, and it's an odd planet too. Excuse me. The moon's crust is thin on the side facing the Earth and thicker on the side away from the Earth. The moon has elements on it that shouldn't be there, like Neptunium-237, which is highly unstable, breaks down in just over 2 million years. And so after 4.5 billion years, because the moon's supposed to be that old, it should all be gone. It's all gone on Earth. Only like slight trace bits of it remain, but it's on the moon. Helium-3 is on the moon. There's 1,100,000 tons of helium-3 on the moon, which is the estimate scientists currently say. And helium-3 is great for fusion reactors, but we don't have it on Earth hardly at all. Again, it's extremely rare. The big craters on the moon are shallow. The small craters are deep. If there were an inner shell on the moon, as two Soviet scientists said with their spaceship moon theory, the small meteors would never penetrate down to it, so they'd leave a deeper hole. Whereas the big meteors would smash into the moon, sink into it and hit that metal shell and then bounce back, which would fill the crater with magma. And that's why they think it's the difference between the big craters and the small craters. Plus, we have NASA's own report on transient lunar phenomena that dates back 500 years, commissioned by NASA in the 60s, which refers to volcanoes on the moon that were seen for months at a time by different astronomers in the past. There are no volcanoes on the moon. We can't even find a dormant volcano. There have been blinks, flashes, traces, mist, smoke, strange structures that seem to appear and disappear. And even alien spacecraft have been seen while the Apollo missions were going to the moon, supposedly. Now, some of these I can't account for, like Neil Armstrong. He never made it public, although his best friend said that he confided in him that was so, that there were two UFOs up on a ridge on the moon when they landed there. I did see one where they were going to the moon in one of the Apollo missions. I can't remember which one, where the astronaut said that alien spaceship is following us. And they said, they can't know, it's probably your booster, it's probably trailing you. He said, no, I can see the booster. This is something else entirely. And then there was another case where a commander in a space shuttle, a female orbiting the Earth, said, there's that alien spaceship again. And immediately her voice cut off. You could see her floating in the cabin, mouth still moving, no helmet on or anything, but you couldn't hear anything she was saying. She had switched to a private channel. So yeah, I think there's definitely evidence to support the idea. And I find it a little spooky.
Now,
My favorite term.
You said that the orbit is circular, and as far as I understand, the Earth's orbit around the sun is a slight ellipse, right?
Yes. Most of the planets, the moons are in elliptical orbits. The moon isn't perfectly circular, but it's darn close to being perfectly circular. Plus, it's just at the right distance, the only moon of hundreds of moons in our solar system that's at the perfect distance to allow for the perfect solar eclipse with the Earth. It also rises and sets at different times of the year in spring and fall, like for the solstices and the equinoxes. That's the only moon we know that does that. The moon's outer crust, the is extremely hard. The original astronauts were bouncing off of it when they were trying to drill into it. That was totally unexpected. There is a layer of fine dust made up of orange spiracules, and they thought these might come from a volcano because they're not currently native to the surface of the moon. But there are no volcanoes on the moon that we know of. When they put seismographs on the moon and they lifted off and dropped the lander back, some people said it rang like a bell. Well, it can't ring like a bell. There's no air on the moon to make sound. But the moon vibrated much longer than it should have from that. And we can't understand why. There's also the problem with the blue gem. That is a crater, the Aristarchus crater. And astrophysicists, astronomers refer to it as the blue gem because they constantly see blue flashes, blue blinks, and blue mist in that crater. Now, they theorized it might be that the sunrise it's right near the edge of the moon that we can see from Earth. And scientists theorized, well, maybe it was the sun doing a reflection of some sort that caused the blue. But if you look, there's plenty of craters all around Aristarchus, and it's the only one that has that blue glow to it. And not all the time, just some of the time. And they did a spectral analysis on it. And did you know that spectral analysis matches the same analysis we get from a fusion reaction? How is that possible?
Is there any evidence out there on how old the moon is?
Well, the rocks we got back from the moon dated back to about 4.5 billion years. So, but there's a problem with that. And the problem seems to be that when Theia, the mythical planet that struck the Earth that created the moon, there are no isotopic signatures of Theia on the moon, only from the Earth's own mantle. But here's another problem. If the moon is composed of the Earth's mantle from that impact, that giant impact, why is there no sign of Theia in the rocks on the moon? They should be scattered all over, just like our rocks from Earth are. Nothing. Can't find Theia. At least we haven't found anything from the so-called, impact planet so far. And there's another thing. The moon's density is too low for the size of it. They have run calculations. It's like 3.24% versus 5.28% density per cubic centimeter on the Earth, and it's that 3.24, I think. I'm close to that anyway, on the moon. Now, for the size of the moon, its density is too low. And one NASA scientist said, something's missing. It has to be masked or something, but something is definitely missing. Hollow moon? Possibly. And if not a hollow moon, perhaps it's large empty lava tubes that are creating the effect.
Do you think the moon's inner structure is some sort of metal and it's just covered with rocks and dust?
Well, I refer to the two Soviet scientists of the Soviet Space Academy who came up with the spaceship moon theory, and they theorized there was an inner shell about 20 to 25 miles deep of the moon, and that was where the aliens lived inside of it, and that the moon was camouflaged to hide the fact it was a spaceship. And there's evidence to suppose the moon may not have always been there. People say, well, it has to have been. We have tides. Well, the sun creates tides too. And even without the moon, we would have tides. Not as severe, but we would have them. And we have written records that refer to a time before the moon. Aristotle in ancient Greece said that there was a time before the Hellenes moved into Greece, that there was another race called the Proselynes. That literally means before there was a moon. The Romans refer to it as well. And also in the New World, in Central and South America, they have a habit of starting every story back in the days before there was a moon.
Oh.
Why not before there was a Venus or before there was a Mars? They're all visible. In fact, Venus was highly sought after by the Mayans. That was their main light in the sky at night. But it wasn't that. It was before there was a moon. And we don't have any maps of the moon that date back more than 500 or 600 years. Why not? I mean, the moon's clearly visible. You and I could draw, at least make an attempt to draw some sort of map of the moon. Why don't we have maps? I'm sorry, not 560 years, about 1,200 to 1,300 years. And we can't account for that. Why weren't they drawing that? So some theorize the moon arrived about 50,000 years ago, some say 12,000. And it may have always been in our solar system and close by, but it parked in its present orbit just recently.
Are you familiar with the Sumerian texts, or I guess you could call the tablets? Yeah, the Anunnaki. In those tablets, there are pictures of our solar system, kind of rudimentary pictures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is the moon in those pictures the Earth's moon? Do you know if that's there or
You got
not?
me on that one. I never thought to check that. Wow, that's a good question. I'll have to look that one up. Have you seen anything about it?
I haven't. I never really thought about it until right now.
Yeah, it always seems to be about Nibiru rather than about the moon or anything else.
Well, I was starting to think that is it possible the moon is Nibiru?
Yeah, that could be a possibility.
If it
I
wasn't
know
here
that the
before.
Anunnaki supposedly created humans to mine gold for them because gold is rare. It's not even produced in a supernova. It takes something like the collision of two neutron stars to create gold.
Hmm.
So anywhere in the universe, gold is going to be a fairly rare commodity. And if they came to Earth to have us mine gold for them, I can understand why. It's one of the most rare elements in the universe.
It's my understanding from geology that most of the gold on Earth came here at a later time, not when the Earth was formed, because if it was, it would be too dense and it would be in the middle of the planet. So if we have gold on the crust here, there should be gold on the moon as well, shouldn't there?
There should be. The gold on the crust of the Earth is supposedly brought up by magma from below, and it's quite often found with quartz and quartzites. And excuse me, and they think that's how it got recycled up towards the surface of the Earth in some places. But on the moon, we have yet to find any gold whatsoever. We have water, though, oddly enough. And the moon is supposed to be airless, so this water is interesting. In fact, astronomers spotted 100 square mile mist on the moon that was composed of water vapor, according to their spectral analysis. And that's interesting because where did that water vapor come from? This mist, this fog on the moon that covered 100 square miles. It actually hid mountains and craters on the moon. That's how you could tell it was there.
Why do you think we haven't built a base up there yet?
Why haven't we been back in almost 60 years? For the same reason, I think we were warned off. I think we go allowed to orbit the moon. I think we can maybe put rovers on the moon, but NASA keeps claiming they're going to send a man to the moon, and they keep changing the date. Started under George Bush, they're going to put a man back on the moon, put a base on the moon. And when was he in power? In the 90s?
Yeah.
Early 2000s? So it's been decades, and we just really haven't. And yet our technology is far superior to what it was back then. Back then, the computer on board the first Apollo 11 mission was about equal to one of our pocket calculators now. Now we're way beyond that with computing capability and booster capability. So why aren't we going back? What's the problem?
There is a book out there, and you're probably aware of it, that's written by a woman who was a nurse during the Roswell event, and allegedly she had a telepathic communication with the non-human biologic being that was captured, allegedly, and the being told her telepathically that the Earth is a prison. Now, if we put that aside, and some people also agree that reincarnation is basically some sort of soul trap, and the moon is like an alien base that captures our spirits and sends us back. Does any of that resonate with you?
I'm afraid not in the least. I believe in facts. You can say anything you want. You could say that the Earth is on the back of a giant turtle. You could say giant bunny rabbits are what hold the stars in place. You can say whatever you want to, and you can believe it. But whether or not I'll believe it without evidence is quite another matter. I like to kick the tires of things. I believe that UFOs exist, but I would love to actually walk up to one and kick its tires, so to speak. No, they don't have tires. But yeah, I deal with reality. I was a MUFON investigator for several years, and because I was so interested, and we investigated a lot of stuff. And the truth of the matter is, if you don't have a solid place to stand to investigate these things, You can't come up with any answers. It's not the scientific method. You can say whatever you want to say, and it might be right. But if I can't repeat that experiment or at least corroborate that it's true, then what good does it do the human race? So she may be telling the truth as she sees it. She may be delusional. She may be writing books just for the money, or she just may be honestly mistaken, or she may be right. I honestly don't know, but I don't see any corroborating evidence for that whatsoever. I can point to things about the moon that are odd, and you can check those out for yourself. You can even examine them for yourself and see that they're true, that the moon's crust is thicker on the far side than on the near side is a definite. There's no getting around that. Whether or not aliens can speak telepathically to someone and say that we're souls trapped on the earth by the moon, well, it makes for good reading.
What is the scientific reasoning behind the crust being thicker on the far side of the moon?
Well, apparently it has to do with the impact of Theia when it hit the Earth and it formed the moon. Oh, there's competing theories about it. One is that the original moon formed like within hours, but there's another smaller moonlet that was also in orbit, that coalesced, and it smacked into the far side of the moon. We do have a very large object at the South Lunar Pole buried there. It's apparently highly metallic in nature, and it's bigger than the island of Hawaii, the main island. What that is, we don't know. We theorize it was an asteroid. There's a big crater there. But unfortunately, we have no way of knowing for sure until we do more investigation of it. But again, theories are great. This is how we come to answers. Someone has a theory, I have a theory, you have a theory. We test them out. Yours works better than mine. We go with yours until someone else's theory comes along that might be even a better fit. And that's how we learn and how we grow. And so that's kind of my approach. I want to add to the sum total new human knowledge. I don't want to obfuscate it with a lot of metaphysical stuff at this point. It may be that it is metaphysical. I don't know, but I don't see evidence for that yet. It's Occam's razor. The principle of Occam's razor says if there's more than one explanation for something, go with the simplest. And honestly, I think the simplest is simply physical facts about the moon and how it might have gotten here, rather than veering off into the metaphysical and thinking it's a soul trap. I mean, you might as well accept Scientology or something like that. I mean, it's just as far out there. But I don't accept Scientology either. I don't find there any proof for it. If they show me proof, I'll accept it.
All right, if we get back to the crust, if it was made by ETs or some other intelligent beings, why would they make the crust thinner on this side of the moon?
Well, our side of the moon has what are called maria, Latin for seas. They're huge areas that are dark. When you look up at the moon at night, you see these dark areas, and that's what we call the man in the moon, the eyes, the mouth, whatever. It's from magma, apparently, or lava that's flowed from the interior. Now, if the aliens were hollowing out the interior, they'd have to put that material somewhere. And the two Soviet scientists theorized that that magma was pumped up from the interior of the moon. And whether or not the moon is completely hollow or partially hollow or just has large empty chambers in it is a matter of conjecture. But you do know that we have spotted things on the moon from time to time, including one that was a smokestack. You can see it on YouTube. Looks like a smokestack anyway. And it's emitting what looks like smoke. And they measured the shadow of that on the ground compared to the surrounding terrain that they know the height of. And this thing is huge. It went up really high. I don't mean 10 or 20 feet. I'm talking hundreds of feet into the air. Now, if you lived inside the moon, even if it was just a chamber rather than all hollow, you would have waste products you'd have to dispel once in a while. That could account for that water mist that astronomers saw on the moon. It could account for that smokestack. It could account for the occasional flashes and blinks that we see. People say, well, it has to be lightning. There's no atmosphere on the moon. There's no lightning. There's no way, other than a flash from a meteor impact, which may be a blink or a flash that we see, that you're going to see anything on the surface of that moon. But when you see things moving, leaving tracks, there's an area called the LA Basin. There's photographs of it. You can look it up online. And it looks literally like a satellite photo of an area of Los Angeles with all these city blocks mapped out. Now, they're much too square and rectangular and repeating in pattern to be considered natural. So what are they? And I mean, there's a lot of questions. I wish we had more answers for them. But it looks like someone may have been playing around with the moon to some extent in the past, and perhaps even in the present. Remember, the moon is a very strategic place to hold. Any general of any military will tell you that the best place for your military to be is on the high ground. The moon is Earth's high ground.
Yeah, talk about high ground.
Yeah.
Let's get back to the craters for a second, because a long time ago I was looking into the hollow moon theory, and I was reading up on the craters about typically the craters should be deeper, but they're real shallow, even the big ones, right?
Right.
And I think the scientific explanation is, well, the dust kind of just settles and slowly accumulates in the bottom, and that's why they're not deep. Does that sound about right to you?
It's a possibility. The dust on the moon doesn't seem to be that thick from what the landings we've made. Oh, there's definitely dust there, but it's not tens of feet thick deep, or we wouldn't have been able to land on the moon. We would have lost the Apollo mission. They're sunk. The small craters are deep. They're what a crater should be. It's the large craters that seem to be shallow. And again, if there was an inner metal shell and a meteor impacted it, and it was a big one, it would penetrate much further than a small meteor in a small crater, and it would bounce off the inner shell and come back up, and with it would bring all that molten magma that it had created by the impact, and that would fill the crater and make it very shallow. Again, that's the two Soviet scientists saying this. And these are highly accredited individuals too, by the way. So I don't discount them. Is it a theory? Yes. Is it been proven? Is there a smoking gun? Absolutely not. Is there some really tantalizing evidence to support the theory? Yes, and quite a bit. Now, is the moon really hollow? I don't know. I would suggest that each person study the matter, read information on it, and try to come up with their own conclusion. And until we get more people on the moon, more boots on the moon, we're not going to know the answers to these questions, if and when we ever actually do go back. So that seems to be the current state of affairs.
Let's say that our government has figured out it's hollow, the Soviets, the Chinese, and whoever else. Do you think there would be some sort of backdoor agreement that we won't talk about it?
I don't even think you would need that agreement. I think they would just do it automatically. If you discovered a gold mine, just chock full of gold, would you run screaming around to all your friends and neighbors, say, I found gold, I found gold? Next question is, where did you find it? You're not going to tell them. And you're not going to tell them that you found the gold. I think it's the same with countries. If they find out something of this magnitude, they're not going to go shouting it from the rooftops. They're going to do their best to keep a lid on it and try to gain as much information, data, and possibly technology out of it as they could. It's just self-preservation. I think America's doing it. I think to a lesser extent, some other countries are doing it as well. Quite possibly China, England, France definitely seems to be involved in all this, and even Brazil to a certain degree.
What was the Phobos incident all about?
That was under the Soviet government of Russia at the time, and I think it took place in 1989. Don't quote me on that; it's been a while. But they sent two probes to Mars. Phobos 1 failed; it's got very close to Mars. Phobos 2 got close. We're supposed to go to the moon, Phobos, one of the two moons of Mars, and it was supposed to get within 50 meters of it and actually land a platform on Phobos. But suddenly it ceased working. But it was sending back telemetry and pictures, and there's a clear picture of a white cylinder-shaped object, elongated, quite large considering the distance it was from the craft when it took the picture. It was immediately after that that the Phobos 2 ceased to function. And Phobos 1 also ceased to function. They had been launched one after the other, a few months apart. So we can't. And by the way, this is interesting too. The moon of Phobos has too low a density for its size. Does it remind you of anything? And what's the only other planet in the solar system we think might have had life, really had life? Not moon, but planet? Mars. And it has an odd moon with a very odd orbit and a very odd shape. And they were thinking it was a captured asteroid, but apparently the orbital mechanics involved don't allow for it being an asteroid. It didn't come from the right location and area, apparently. So whatever, and it's got a very degrading orbit. In about 3 million years, it will impact Mars. No big deal. It's not that big and won't be going that fast. But yeah, it'll hit Mars. So what is Phobos?
I'm glad you brought up asteroids, because sometimes people talk about that there was another planet in our system that exploded, and that's what the asteroid belt is. I can't remember what they call it, Maldek or something like that. You may.
Yeah.
Is
If
there
you,
any truth to that?
well, it's difficult to say,
And
but
if
I
so,
think
could the
not.
moon be part of that?
Well, it could have been. Ceres is a pretty big moonlet. It's in the asteroid belt. It's actually what I would call a planetesimal or a Pluton because it was big enough for gravity to collapse it into a spherical shape. So, but if you had all the asteroids together, they don't come near to making a planet. Even if you threw in the moon, it would be a pretty small planet. The current theory is that between Mars and Jupiter, the gravity tug and pull of the giant gas giants, but principally Jupiter, kept that planet from ever forming. If there indeed ever could have been a planet there, and if there was, it wouldn't have been very big. It would have probably been smaller than Mars. So, but is it possible? Yeah, it's possible. Again, we only have theories. We don't have the answers, and we're finding out lately that some of our theories are not working too well. I mean, as to the age of the universe, galaxies spotted that apparently appeared 250 million years after the Big Bang, when it should have taken billions for them to form, and we can't figure out why. The universe is expanding, but it seems to be expanding at different rates in different areas when it's supposed to be a constant. So, thanks to the JWST uh, observatory, we're
Mhm.
beginning to find out a lot of what we don't know.
Have you ever considered why do comets never burn out?
Oh, you're talking about comets.
Right. Like let's say the
Yeah.
Halley's Comet. Why does that thing never eventually completely melt or hasn't
Well,
melted yet?
actually, it didn't even put on a show the last time it was here. The first time, a few times it came that we can remember, the year Mark Twain was born and the year Mark Twain died. He was going out with the comet. It was clearly visible in the night sky. This time, it was virtually not visible without the aid of some type of visual equipment. And we think that Halley's is basically just slowly phasing out. It's basically burned away a lot of its volatiles. They do eventually break up. They do fall apart. We go through meteor showers every year around August, and those are the breakups of a comet that comes by and it lost a lot of its material. So if you see a shooting star, you're probably seeing part of an old comet.
Hmm. All right. So personally, I know you're about facts, but on your own theory, do you think the moon was here and they hollowed it out, or some ETs dragged it here through space?
You know, it's hard to say. The jury's still out for me. I think there's, again, a tantalizing amount of evidence to support that idea, but I have yet to see a smoking gun. And I need to see more information before I can decide. I will say this, I think there's a high possibility that the moon has been interfered with by aliens, whether they hollowed it out or have hollow chambers on it, occupied it once and no longer do, or are still occupying it. I think the moon has been messed with by aliens. I really do. I think the Earth has been, and I think this has been going on for centuries, thousands of years.
I'm right there with you, but until you brought up the time before there was a moon, that's it kind of changes my mind because I'd never heard about that.
Yeah, isn't that odd? Uh, why before the moon? You would have thought why before Venus or why before Mars, but you have the Greeks talking about it. You have the Romans talking about it. You have tribes in Central and South America talking about it. The Mayans who adored Venus, it was the primary light in the night sky, apparently, but not the moon. The moon's considerably brighter and bigger than Venus, but why Venus and not the moon?
Is there some certain text that you can refer me to so I can look into this later? Like, where does it say this, the time before the moon?
Well, actually, you can search the internet pretty easy on that. You can type in the word prosolene, Proselene, and it probably will come up for you, prosolene.
What about the Bible? Does the Bible ever mention the time before the moon?
There are a couple passages in the Bible. One is from Job, I forget the number, but I just glanced at it yesterday and it refers to in those days when there was no moon.
Wow.
Yeah, but there's only a couple short passages regarding it. So, but there's quite a few stories in Central and South America that many years, many times ago, before there was a moon, and the Proselynes who were supposed to inhabit Greece before the Hellenic group did, and they were supposed to be the people before there was a moon. The Romans referred to them, the Greeks referred to them. So again, is it a smoking gun? No, but it's interesting, isn't it?
So those stories from the Greeks and the Romans, they're kind of like myths or talking about earlier inhabitants of the earth and the time before the moon. It's not really like they're documenting, hey, this is the time before the moon, but they're like talking about a time in the past. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and
Okay.
it is recorded in history. They actually wrote these things down. They didn't write them down at the time they occurred,
Right.
but then most historians write about events after they happen.
Right.
And and remember, one man's myth is another man's religion.
Yes.
We have always referred to the Eastern mythologies, the Indian Vedic texts, as being strictly mythologies. That was from the Western Christian point of view. The Indian culture, the Hindus, firmly believe that those Vedic texts are actually their history.
Mm.
So it's a matter of perspective. And I don't think you can discount. I mean, for instance, the tales of the Great Flood, that could very well have been resulted when the moon moved into orbit around the Earth. It could have caused no problem with the tides. And what we remember racially as the Great Flood, is in stories and legends all around the globe in every single culture practically of a Great Flood. Now, that could have referred to the Little Dryas period, or it could have referred to any number of things, but it also could refer to the moon when it was coming into orbit around the Earth and upsetting tides, causing earthquakes and things. Something ended the megalithic culture on Earth. For centuries, these great stone objects, the Baalbek platform in Lebanon,
Yes.
the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the
Mhm.
different stones in Stonehenge and all around the world, there was this megalithic culture, and then suddenly, practically overnight, it vanished.
Right. Do you have any sort of time period of when it was the time before the moon?
I personally have tried to date it back to, some people say about 50,000 years ago, which is probably closer to the truth. But I can estimate that at least was 12,000, could have been as much as 15 to 28,000 years ago. So there's a big time span there. But recorded history didn't start till about 5 to 6,000 years ago. We have evidence of civilization when there shouldn't have been any well before that, around 12,000 BC. As with, I'm going to mess up saying this because I always do, Göbekli Tepe.
Yes.
Yeah,
In
and
Turkey?
that dates back. So, and they deliberately buried it. That site was deliberately buried as if to protect it from something. From what?
Yeah, I had the guy on. I don't know. I feel terrible. I don't remember his name, but he is Forbidden Archaeology is one of his books. You probably know who I'm speaking
Oh
of.
yeah.
And I mean, I think he's going back, humans have been around for at least 300,000. I think he'll go even further, but, at least 300,000 years.
Yes, but civilization wasn't supposed to have started until about no more than 7,000 years ago, and probably closer to five. At least recorded history didn't start till 5,000 years ago. And they don't think civilization really was around 12,000 years ago. They thought we were hunter-gatherers.
Mhm.
Well, how do hunter-gatherers build places like Göbekli Tepe,
Yes.
or Göbekli Tepe, whatever that is? But I wish, by the way, did you know that just means hill?
No, I
They
didn't.
just called, yeah, I wish they just called it the hill. But
I thought it's not even completely known the time when the Sphinx was built, because some people will say it's like 12 to 14,000 years old.
one geologist says about 10,000 years ago, yeah. It's due to the erosion patterns on it. Considering what geology has said about rainfalls in that area for the last 10,000 years, there has been no rainfall to speak of in the desert and for a long, long time. And that can't account for the erosion channels we've seen in the Sphinx. And isn't it odd that it dates back to that same time period, 10 to 12,000 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of those ruins in Turkey, and I'm avoiding saying the name again.
Yeah, so we'll
And
just call it the hill.
the hill, yeah.
Are you aware of Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan?
Mohenjo-Daro, yes.
Do you think that there was some sort of ancient nuclear explosion tens of thousands of
Well,
years
it would
ago?
seem so. And in fact, we have evidence not just from Mohenjo-Daro, but also in Scotland. They found in the center of the city a vast destroyed area, and it had vitrified glass. That is where the heat was so intense that it literally changed the rock into a form of glass. We found it at Los Alamos after the first nuclear tests in America.
Right.
And the only two things we know that could cause it are maybe a major asteroid impact or a nuclear explosion. So where did this vitrified glass come from? We also found highly radioactive skeletons. When I say highly radioactive, you're not going to die from touching it, but they're about 50 times higher than the background radiation. So why were they so radioactive? And of course, the Vedic text, I think it was in Ramayana, refers to a nuclear blast, and it talks about the symptoms of what happened. Birds fell from the sky. Uh, Soldiers were poisoned and jumped in rivers to try to get rid of the poison that was on them, that was burning them. So, I mean, again, is it a smoking gun? No, but there does seem to be a lot of evidence. And again, remember, the Indians believe the Vedic texts are history. They don't think they're mythology like we do. And also in Scotland, there are castles where some of the stones in the outer perimeter of the castle are vitrified glass. And also there's one in Germany that has this. So something was going on quite a long time ago. Now, was an atomic blast go off in that castle? Was there? Probably not. They probably used stones that were already there to make the castle.
Right.
But yeah, something definitely is going on. And then there's the Creator Stone that was found in Russia, and which seems to show a map of the Earth. It is gigantic. And it's in 3 layers, and we don't know how those layers were put together, but one's transparent. And it seems to show a map of the Earth from about 30,000 feet in the air, and it shows canals and channels and dams in the Caucasus region of Russia that aren't there today. And they think that stone dates back about 250,000 years.
You came up with the theory, or I guess you would call it the dark forest theory. Can you tell us about that?
I didn't come up with the name, but I came up with that theory about 10, 11 years ago. Yeah. Okay, here's the idea. Life is highly competitive. It has to eat to survive. It will eat anything else that it can get away with. It competes constantly. Animals bear lots of young, sometimes in the thousands for sea creatures or insects, and only a few survive because of competition and other things eating them. We, as an intelligent species, are highly competitive. In fact, we're the best. We now control the planet, or think we do. And so we are the top of the predator list. Well, apparently, predators do much better than herbivores as far as gaining intelligence goes. Just look at a dog or a cat versus a cow or a goat. So the theory is that competition doesn't stop where the atmosphere on our planet stops. Every planet that has life on it must have competition, must have the same pattern of survival. Now, if this is so, we're creating a lot of highly competitive intelligent species. Now, some of those species are going to be so competitive, they're not going to want the other ones around. They're going to want control, they're going to want resources. And even more than that, they probably want to be the species that goes on into eternity, so to speak. They want to be the one race that controls and rules. They don't want to have to compete or get killed off by other races. So there is that to contend with. Then also in my book, Darker Side of the Moon, They Are Watching Us, I also pointed out that about 5% of the human race is criminal. I'm not talking about the kind that takes a pen home from work. I'm talking about real criminal, murderous type people. Well, if civilizations, if intelligent species have that same percentage, just 5% are dangerous and deadly, and they're preying on the other races, then yes, it is a dark forest out there. So if you're in danger of being attacked by such a species, knew they were coming, or just knew that this was the way it was, you could hollow out asteroids or moons or moonless, build your civilization inside of it, set sail on the cosmic sea, drift between the stars with the rogue planets, and they think there's more rogue planets between stars than there are around stars in our galaxy. And you're completely sealed in. No radio waves are leaking. Nothing is showing you're there. Not even heat energy waste. It's all contained. It's all a closed ecosystem. You would exist for thousands upon thousands of millennia that way. And you would be safe because the enemy could never hunt you down or find you. It would be virtually impossible. So, yeah, the moon could be an example of that, or Phobos. Or we might even do it. We're talking already about hollowing out asteroids. So, there's one asteroid that's so wealthy in metals that they want to try to get to, and they're planning a mission, NASA. It's worth $10,000 quadrillion for the entire economy of the whole Earth. That one asteroid.
It's amazing.
So, and even Carl Sagan said, well, you can hollow out these asteroids, mine them, and then once it's hollow, they can become your space stations and orbit around Earth or around the moon. So the idea is not new. And we have the capability right now of managing it. It doesn't take much to nudge an asteroid into a new orbit. It takes time to get out there, time to nudge it a bit, but over time that orbit would change more and more and more until finally it would end up where you wanted it to, like in orbit around the Earth or the Moon.
Let's say there was a closed system civilization inside the moon. You think
Hmm.
they would present any danger for us?
Oh, sure. Sure, their technology would be much more advanced than ours. Otherwise, they couldn't manage it. Uh, Also, the fact is they probably have been there a very long time and probably are watching us. And that's what scares me more than anything. Um, why are they watching us? Why are they here?
Yeah.
What do they want? What's their agenda? Is it good or is it bad? Judging by all the abductions, over 1 million a year worldwide. If you believe anyone's abducted, then you have to believe at least some of those people are. Why are they being abducted? People come up missing in every country on the earth every year permanently. I was mentioning that to you before the show.
Hmm.
There's some 60,000, according to the FBI, to 65,000 in America alone. Australia says 25 to 30,000. Every country has them. And they're not just people who were murdered, kidnapped. Those are counted for in the statistics. They're not people who just want to start a new life and get rid of their old identity. These are people who just simply vanished for no reason and have never reappeared. Now, if you're talking about tens of thousands from each country every year, that's an enormous number disappearing from Earth every year. Where are they going and what's happening to them? And why?
I don't know. My first guess is their food. It's kind of dark, but that's just what comes to my mind.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that couldn't be the case. Or they could be slave labor. They could be slave labor. If you believe the Anunnaki story, humans were designed strictly to be slaves. Maybe the descendants of the Anunnaki think we still are, and they're still using us that way. But our numbers are so massive now. Remember the story of the Anunnaki, there was a rebellion, and that's one of the reasons they had to leave. In the Vedic texts of India, there was a story of a great war on Earth and in space, and a rebellion of the humans against their overlords at that particular time, too. There's two distinct cultures, two different time periods, both with very similar stories. So it is possible that there's some truth to them. You got to remember that way back, the Earth had a much smaller population, and most of it was along the coastal regions. So if something happened or that caused tsunamis or tidal waves, if you prefer, to attack the coast, that could destroy what would be a world civilization at the time because it wouldn't be high tech. And for instance, the Indians believed that some humans were allowed to pilot the so-called Vimana, their spacecraft or aircraft, and that they were very special and very honored to be able to do that. The Vedic texts even go into describing how the Vimana worked and what caused them to work. And so it's highly detailed. Now, this is just mythology. It's very detailed mythology. So there you go. I mean, what really happened back then? We don't know. If we're a retrograde culture, a race with amnesia, we have to sort of pick and choose through the bones of history to try to reconnect it all and try to make a story. But if we had some great catastrophe back around 12,000 years or even 50,000 years ago that basically wiped out our civilization almost entirely, and with an onset of an ice age, there would be very little for us left to look at. Have you ever watched that show, Life After Humans?
I may have seen something like that. Like one time they showed Los Angeles, what it would look like, 10 years after
Exactly.
humans, 20 years, 50 years, whatever.
Yeah. By the end of 10,000 years, it'd be almost nothing, nothing left at all to show that we were ever here. Nothing.
Even
No
with
buildings, no concrete, no steel, nothing.
even
All
with
gone.
all the technology we have here and all the manufactured things, it would all disappear.
Yep. Time and erosion, it takes it away. You might find stuff buried in layers of earth, like the dinosaurs, but you're not going to find it on the surface. Even dams would disappear. Uh, Nature has a great way of erasing things, and it does erase things. And the pyramids are quite old. They date back about 3,000 years or so, maybe a bit longer. And but even they're in bad shape. Rome's concrete is much better than our concrete is today. I think it's because of Mount Vesuvius ash that they use mixed with it. It's the reason they claim it is. And it's lasted some 2,000 years, but it's in a pretty deplorable state these days as well. Imagine what it would look like after 10,000 years. Would it even be a sign of it existing? And our concrete today is not as well built. Our steel would not last long, would rust and disappear. Cars, everything. The only thing that would last would be glass. If you had like a Coca-Cola bottle or something.
Hmm.
But even glass is a super cool liquid. So over enough time, even that would melt and flow, and you would never know that it was made by a human being.
Since you were talking about predators, that's what made me think that, we would probably end up as food. But if 1 million people a year are disappearing, that's a lot of people. Let's say over 20, 30 years, that's 20, 30 million people. And if they're used for slave labor, where are all these people going? Because I don't think they'd be only on the moon.
Oh, no, they wouldn't be on the moon. They would be all over the place. The Vedic texts refer to the fact that there were quite a few different races. And it almost sounds, if you read the story well enough, like there was almost an empire, an interstellar empire, and that they were at war with each other, and the war spread to Earth. There's even one story in the Vedic text that talks about, I think it was Kali. Don't quote me on that, but it was one of the gods of the time. I thought it was Kali. Actually took his Vimana and flew to the moon and had a battle on the moon. Now, isn't it interesting that way back then, in the Vedic text, some thousands of years ago, they figured you could actually go to the moon and land on it, and it wasn't just the light in the sky. So that's interesting. But we can be used for it. And also, if they don't care whether we live or die, maybe they have to keep replacing the slave population. If you're killing them off in the mines and stuff on some horrible planet with a methane atmosphere, well, you're going to have to replace them on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Capitalism at its best.
Well, if we go back to Occam's razor, the simplest answer would be slavery or food.
Yes, it would be one of those two things or both.
One or both.
Or possibly breeding. But I mean, how many people do you need to breed a new population?
Right. Does it mention in the Vedas anywhere about a time before the moon?
I have not come across it. I haven't read all of them. I've read the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but I haven't read the rest. I only did it in relationship to my research at the time, specifically. And by the way, we were talking about the metaphysical aspect of things. I'm not against it. I have a firm belief that reality is much more than we realize it is. So I'm not a complete skeptic. I simply would like to see some proof. I don't want to just believe that God is a great big popsicle on top of Mount Everest or something. I want someone to prove it to me. Bring me back a piece of the popsicle, whatever. But I'm looking for answers like everyone else is, and I'm just hoping that we find them. And to me, the scientific method so far is the best approach. But it may not work in all cases. It may not work if things become more metaphysical. And quantum mechanics and the metaphysical seem to be coming together in a lot of ways. So my mind is open.
You see pictures out there of Krishna and perhaps other Indian deities that are blue in color, right?
Yeah, Kali was blue.
Do you think that they were really blue in color? If this is a history, and if so, were those ETs? And
they were also multi-armed too.
Yes.
It was a human depiction of the extraterrestrials at the time. Remember, with the Anunnaki, they supposedly lived in palaces and rarely ventured out. If you read that right, it could mean that they simply weren't well adjusted to Earth's environment and atmosphere. And they also used humans as servants, literally as servants in their temples. And to this day, we have temples and we have servants in those temples, although the gods are rather lacking, it seems, in most of those buildings now, at least in a physical sense. So are we carrying on a long, long tradition? And were we genetically bred to be subservient to the gods, to believe that they were, there are some scientists that they were hardwired to believe in religion. Did someone make us that way so that we wouldn't rebel, so that we would always be the faithful servants, that we'd always be the priest of the temple that literally waited on the gods hand and foot? It's an interesting idea. And I'm kind of in favor of it, actually. It would explain a lot.
Why would you be in favor of it?
I'm in favor of believing that it might be true. I'm not in favor of the idea in general. No one wants to be a servant or a slave to someone who thinks they're superior to you.
I was watching another podcast recently, and the guest on there was saying that According to our DNA, it has been manipulated that we like to worship, or we tend to worship. In a way, I can see that because we all either worship a religious figure, a sports figure, an entertainment figure.
It seems to be an integral part of our makeup. And that's what I meant about our brains being hardwired for it. It may be that we have no choice. Maybe that we're genetically altered to believe in a divinity, and that divinity could very well be our extraterrestrials if they were the ones breeding us and controlling us. And, you know, there is some validity to that, I think, because everybody wants to believe in something. Why is that?
Yeah. Although there are some out there that are hardcore atheists.
Well, they're hardcore atheists, but I think secretly they might want to believe, but just can't because their rational self tells them that it can't be so. My rational self tells me that. I'm not an atheist. I'm an agnostic. I'm sitting on the fence. I'm waiting for some proof one way or another. I'm not going to discount something because I have no proof of it, but I'm not going to accept something that I don't have proof for either. But am I going to say it doesn't exist? No, I just don't know. And if you ever watched Star Trek Next Generation, they asked Picard about that. Do you believe in heaven? He says, well, I'm of the opinion that the universe is a vast place. And there are people who don't believe and there are people who believe. And I think there's room in this universe because it's so large, there's something in the middle. And that's kind of how I feel about it.
Well, Rob, I want to let people know that you are a prolific writer. And not only do you have a book about the moon, but you have many books about many subjects. If people want to find out more about your books, should they go to Amazon or do you have a website?
They can go. I have a website, but I don't keep it up. I'm sorry. They can go to Amazon. They can go to Permuted Press, where some of my books are, the nonfiction we're talking about here. They can go to Simon & Schuster, which also has the books. They can go to Smashwords. They can go to Barnes & Noble, and they can get the books usually in either Kindle or any ebook format or print or even hardcover. So that pretty much covers it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what are you working on that you want people to know about?
I'm working on a book on shadow people.
Oh, wow.
This is about the idea of there being a greater reality. And I think shadow people might very well exist. Again, is there a smoking gun? No. But there's a lot of evidence. And if you start typing in shadow people on YouTube, you're going to come up with some interesting stuff.
Now, when you talk about shadow people, are you saying that they're beings in another dimension or ETs?
Again, the jury's still out on that. I think they could be ETs. They could very well be from another dimension, or they could be cloaked.
Wow. I'm sure you're aware of that event that just happened in Las Vegas within the last year or so when there was like supposedly ETs in somebody's backyard and the police were called and all that. And I thought that they were potentially cloaked. I saw a video on that. Do you know anything about that?
I know the basics of it. I know that there was a bright light in the sky that everyone saw. It looked like a meteor falling or something. And then immediately afterwards, some people, I believe they were a Hispanic family, claimed that there were these tall, thin people in the back of the yard near the fence. And the police came and they did get some sort of hazy pictures of them. But even the police believed them. They didn't think they were lying. So again, we don't have that smoking gun, that hard evidence. But it certainly is intriguing, and it certainly seems like something out of the ordinary happened there. And if it wasn't that, then what was it? Really tall, thin coyotes? I mean, it has to be
Chupacabra?
something, right? Yeah.
Well,
Probably
Rob,
Wile E. Coyote.
yes. Well, before we wrap it up, Rob, can you leave us with one last positive message?
How about a bit of advice instead?
Sure.
Don't go for long walks at night, and don't send your children to the store at night on their own, because we don't know what's out there. And if it is watching us and it can abduct us, and a lot of people say they are abducted, you don't want that to happen to you or your children. And one more piece of advice. If you see a UFO or something odd in the night sky and you start taking pictures of it, fine, do that. We need the evidence. But if it looks like it's honing in on you and coming towards you, run like hell.
Rob, thank you for your advice, and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me on your show, sir.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.